Has been over the weekend. Horrifying, upsetting, anxiety-inducing, horrendous scenes unfolding right across the nation this weekend. I want to look at it then between now and 7 o'clock. I want to look at Keir Starmer's response, the policing response. I want to look at the role of the media, social media. And you know what? We need some goodness. So let's have a look at how people have come together after all of this as well. Also tonight there is another vigil happening in Southport right now. Of course, so many of the unrest has been sparked by the horrendous murdering of those 3 little girls. That's the scenes that you are seeing on your screens right now. Beautiful, a community coming together, lots of little girls waving their bubbles, lots of flowers, a community in mourning, but one also clearly taking lots of strength from each other too. Indeed. So, as I said, lots to discuss between now and 7 o'clock. But first, let's get the 6 o'clock news headlines.
Good evening from the GB newsroom. It's just gone 6 o'clock. Your headlines. The Prime Minister's warning those inciting violence across England could face prison time following a weekend of unrest. During this morning's emergency Cobra meeting, Sir Keir Starmer's promised additional police resources are being deployed nationwide.
In relation to the police, I'm absolutely clear that we will have the officers we need where we need them to deal with this disorder. And that is why the standing army has been set up, specialist officers ready to be deployed to support communities. On the question of prisons, firstly, we're monitoring it on a daily basis. I'm appalled that we've been put in this position by the previous government, that is even a discussion, it's even a question that you have to ask me. But we will make this work and ensure that we've got the places that are needed to bring the perpetrators swiftly to justice.
It comes as the National Police Chiefs Council says so far 378 arrests have been made over the past week in relation to the unrest. A wave of people have now appeared in courts charged over the ongoing riots. Overnight in Rotherham alone, 6 arrests were made and 1 person's been charged after at least 12 police officers were injured during disorder outside a hotel. Meanwhile, Merseyside police have said that 1 child remains in hospital a week on from the stabbing attack in Southport, which sparked the riots. Meanwhile, several countries have issued safety warnings to their citizens in the UK due to the riots. Nigeria, Malaysia and Australia have sent out alerts telling people living or visiting the UK to stay away from demonstrations. In other news, a hospital in Portsmouth's reopened after having to close its A&E unit because of a power outage. The Queen Alexandra declared a major incident this morning, which led to a number of procedures being cancelled. Phone lines were also down, but they are now back up and running. Family members of British embassy workers in Beirut have been evacuated from the region amid fears of all-out war between Israel and Lebanon. The government's also renewing calls for British citizens to leave immediately, with the military on standby to get people out of the Middle East. Tensions in the region are high after leaders of the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah and Hamas were assassinated last week. Back in the UK, pharmacy bosses are urging people not to buy fake weight loss jabs online. They're warning of a possible explosion in unlicensed medication on the internet after shortages of Ozempic, which are expected to continue until next year. The injections have become popular, with social media and celebrities showing before and after pictures of fat loss. In the US, Vice President Kamala Harris is expected to announce her running mate later after interviewing 3 top candidates. Her shortlist of all-white men have a record of winning over rural, white or independent voters. The decision will be a pivotal moment as Harris prepares to challenge Donald Trump in the upcoming election following President Biden's exit from the race. The candidates will be informed tonight or Tuesday morning whether they've been picked. Hurricane Debby, now upgraded to a Category 1 storm, has made landfall on the east coast, threatening a 10-foot storm surge and record-breaking rainfall. More than 60 counties in Florida are under a state of emergency, with thousands ordered to evacuate as the storm rolls in. Forecasters are warning of catastrophic flooding and life-threatening conditions. And fears of a recession in the US have caused stock markets to fall sharply around the world. The FTSE 100 was down more than 2% after markets opened. In Asia, shares closed with a big drop, the biggest fall since 1987's Black Monday. And former England cricketer and coach Graham Thorpe has died at the age of 55. He played 100 tests for his country in a 13-year international career. The England cricket teams remembered him as one of the finest ever and a beloved member of the cricket family. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophia Wensler, more in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much for that. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm with you until 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, I've got my panel, Matt Goodwin, the pollster and academic. Also alongside me, James Schneider, the former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn. Good evening, gentlemen. You're both very welcome tonight. And you know the drill is not just about us three here. It's very much about you guys at home as well. What is on your mind tonight? How are you feeling today? I mean, if you're anything like me, you will have seen lots of footage of horrendous things unfolding across the country this weekend. How does it make you feel? I'm going to spend the next hour focusing on exactly this, the state of the nation. We've had protests, riots, you name it, police being horrendously assaulted. We've had innocent members of the public being innocently horrendously assaulted. You've had hotels housing migrants being set fire to, and you've even had just the most, I don't know a word to use for it really, people looting. I mean, in my hometown of Hull, I'm ashamed to say it really, you've had people nicking shoes. I've seen instances of people smashing up Greggs. The beauty shops, Lush and things like that. I mean, come on now. There's not a sane individual in the land that would do anything other than absolutely call this out for what it is. It is disgusting, disgraceful, criminal behaviour. I want to get into it all, though. I want to look at the government's response. I want to look at the policing response, the role of social media and so on and so forth. But I do just want to take a step back for a second. So you're very welcome, by the way, to get in touch all the usual ways. You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.com. You can go to the website, gbnews.com/yoursay. Or, of course, you can tweet or X me as well. But as I was saying, I will just rewind because, of course, the thing that's kind of sparked so much of this on the streets is that absolutely horrendous, heartbreaking situation in Southport. Those little girls attending that Taylor Swift. It was a dance concert, wasn't it? It was a dance concert and a bracelet-making class. The start of the summer holidays, it should have been a delightful moment, but unfortunately for many children and adults, it, of course, was not. We saw the horrendous murder of 6-year-old BB King, 7-year-old Elsie Dotz-Stancombe and 9-year-old Alice De Silva Aguirre. I've got to say there's a vigil taking place in Southport as we speak. These are live pictures there from the scene. If you're listening on the radio, I shall describe what we're seeing. We're seeing the community come together. It looks very peaceful. You've got lots of children along there with their families. You've got bubbles being played with and blown by the children. And it's just a nation, that's a community in mourning. And, of course, we'll be familiar with the fact that as a vigil was happening previously, what we also saw unfolding streets away was absolute carnage, to put it mildly. But, of course, I do think in all of this, I think the memory of those 3 girls has often been forgotten because the conversation has moved on, Matt, to the horrendous acts that I've just been describing. What's your take on it all?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that everybody in this country, I would hope, would condemn the violence and the disorder that's taking place. If you're idiotic enough to be destroying your own local community, to be using violence, and you deserve to feel the full force of the law. I think at the same time, it is also true that Keir Starmer and the Labour government, from my perspective, have managed this very badly so far. I would have liked to have seen Keir Starmer and Labour come out forcefully and condemn violence on all sides. I would have liked to have seen them talk less about far-right thuggery and a lot more about disorder and criminality. I think for many people out there, the response looks very one-sided. And I would like to have seen us move on to have a bit more of a mature conversation about what is really driving a lot of this unrest. Keir Starmer, in his statement this evening, says, whatever the motivation, this is not protest, it is violence. Actually, I think for lots of people out there, what is happening is protest. I think they're protesting about illegal migration, the collapse of our borders. I think they're protesting about being lied to by British people on when it comes to legal migration. They've had 14 years of governments and parties promising them reductions. And I think they're protesting about an elite class in this country that doesn't seem to want to keep them safe in their own country. And I think that's where this tragedy has become a lightning rod for that underlying sentiment. So I'd like to see a lot of changes, Michelle.
We're going to discuss a lot of that in more detail as the programme progresses, and I will show you in a few minutes some clips of Keir Starmer in case you missed it. But James, just top level, your overall response to it all?
It's been absolutely horrifying to see, and to see what I think the country that most of us would recognise, which is what you just showed us from the vigil in Southport, and that horror being turned into and used for racist, targeted violence that we have seen. I mean, yes, there's criminality and looting, but there have been directed attacks on people because of their skin colour and because of their religion, which is not something that we should be seeing in any country, and it should not be happening here in Britain. I think that the government has been a bit slow in a number of ways. I think slow in the way it speaks. I think a lot more effort should have happened earlier on to reassure people who are being directly targeted or could be directly targeted by these racist attacks that those are not British values and that the public sides with them. And I think also to be much clearer, like these are organised, these are political, and they are racist. You may not like the term far right. We can have a semantic discussion if we want. We probably shouldn't. But if people are being dragged out of their car because of the colour of their skin, or or hotels housing migrants are set on fire, these are racist attacks, and that is the character of them, and we should call them out. Of course, there are things that could have happened faster, it seems, with policing. It seems like the police in Southport on Tuesday night were totally overwhelmed, and things should have moved faster, given that these are not spontaneous uprisings of people. These are organised. There are social media channels, there are Telegram channels. These are announced protests, and so we need the policing to catch up with that level of organisation that we're seeing.
Shall I just take a moment then, in case anyone hasn't seen some of the response to it then? So Keir Starmer, he addressed the nation. This was yesterday. Let's remind ourselves what he was saying yesterday.
I won't shy away from calling it what it is. Far-right thuggery. To those who feel targeted because of the colour of your skin or your faith, I know how frightening this must be. I want you to know that this violent mob do not represent our country, and we will bring them to justice.
And of course, there's been an emergency Cobra meeting today. Let's look at how Keir Starmer addressed the nation after that as well.
There are a number of actions that came out of the meeting. The first is we will have a standing army of specialist officers, public duty officers, so that we'll have enough officers to deal with this where we need them. The second is we'll ramp up criminal justice. There have already been hundreds of arrests. Some have appeared in court this morning. I've asked for early consideration of the earliest naming and identification of those involved in the process.
So that's Keir Starmer there. How do you think he's responding to it? How would you rate his response?
I think he looks. I think he looks slow. I agree with James. I think they could have moved a lot faster. I think he and Yvette Cooper, I think, have been outflanked by events. They look like they're catching up, not ahead of the events. And I think, look, as I say, I think lots of people in this country perceive the response to be somewhat one-sided because I don't think it is just about far-right thuggery. The clips that I've seen on social media, there's an element of that among a minority, for sure. But I think I've also seen gangs of organised Muslim mobs storming around streets with weapons, attacking people, again, because of their race, because they're white. I've seen some horrific instances of ethnic conflict clearly playing out on Britain's streets, people fighting on the basis of race and religion. And at the root of this, Michelle, is the fact, that what we're seeing really is a demonstration of how our model of multiculturalism just isn't working. And we've had this debate on and off now for 20 years. But I think this is going to be a game changer in that you can't really look at Britain now and say, well, this model of multiculturalism is working. I was in Hungary for the last 4 days at a conference. Very conservative country, mocked by elites around the world. It was stable, secure, didn't see any illegal migration, didn't see any chaos, didn't see any unrest. I arrived back in the UK last night. And the country looked like it was completely out of control. And to be frank, the government looked like it had lost control of the country. So we need, I think, a more even-handed approach, both from Starmer and Yvette Cooper. She should be on the TV this morning when she was interviewed by her husband on GBNews. On Good Morning Britain. She should be out there saying, this isn't just about one group, this is about everybody. And that too applies to policing, which I know we'll come and talk about. But there is a sense out there in Britain, a sense of unfairness, that the institutions are leaning one way and not dealing with everybody fairly and evenly. And I do think that's contributing to this.
Do you agree with that?
No, not at all. I think if you take this false perception of two-tier policing, I watched a Tommy Robinson video yesterday from his Cypriot redoubt after his workout, and he was saying exactly the same sorts of things that you are saying, Matt. And the reason why people have a false impression that, as Tommy Robinson was saying, we've had 9 months of jihadist marches in London, which is a nonsense, but has been peddled from the top of our politics and the top of our media. We had Suella Braverman as Home Secretary saying that the Islamists are now in charge, that London is a no-go zone, that there are weekly hate marches, all of which was objectively nonsense.
Not if you're Jewish.
But, that's also absolutely not the case. Those are not threatening marches for Jewish people, having been on them as a Jewish person with the Jewish bloc many times.
But hold on, a lot of Jewish people are, just because you're not frightened, and that's great, a lot of Jewish people are frightened by them.
Can I ask you just one question about two-tier policing?
Sure.
Because this is what I'd like someone on the left of politics to answer this for me. So when Keir Starmer, after the Black Lives Matter protests, came out, rushed, I would argue, after nearly 30 police officers had been injured, after mass disruption, desecration of national monuments, and he came out and he did the video saying, I'm taking the knee, I'm showing solidarity with BLM. Why is that okay? That's acceptable. And we also had a conversation at the time saying BLM protests reflect legitimate grievances in minority communities. Why is that acceptable? But when it comes to these protests, we're not able to say, well, these protests reflect wider grievances, and Starmer's approach is so different from what it was with the BLM protests. Just from the left perspective, I really want to understand this. Why can I see this asymmetry?
Well, I imagine it's because you want to see it, but I'm very clearly not a spokesperson for Keir Starmer, but he is not he's not a policeman when he's coming out and he's saying that the Black Lives Matter relate to grievances over police violence and racism in this country, whereas attacking and setting fire to a hotel, terrorising people, setting out roadblocks and asking people if they are white, pulling people out of cars in organised violence, this is not a protest against an injustice. This is a got-up, racist, political movement got up by large sections of our media and our politics who like to push the sorts of lines that you're pushing about how this is a natural reflection of the failures of multiculturalism or whatever it has, when actually what we see in our society for the vast majority of our society is communities coming together, people living with their neighbours, things like we're seeing in Southport. What we see from that other side, from the racist end of politics, is turning tragedy into more tragedy.
So the BLM injustice is legitimate and other injustices are not, essentially, is the difference.
Well, I'm saying that there isn't an injustice about having people of other skin colours and religions in the country in which you live.
I would say many Brits who have experienced, for example, widespread sexual exploitation of young white girls across northern towns, I'd say that's a legitimate injustice.
I do not... So you think it's a legitimate injustice to have black and brown, Muslim, Hindu, whatever it would be, people living in our country? You think that is an injustice?
That's not what I said at all. I said if you're living in a town like Rotherham, which has had disturbances, where 1,400 young girls were systematically raped, sexually assaulted and subjected to horrific abuse, that is an injustice. You would agree with that. I think everyone in this country, I would hope, would agree with that.
Of course.
So we can't look at a protest like BLM, which caused massive unrest and violence across the West, and Keir Starmer, after that massive violence and unrest, came out and said, I align myself with BLM, and then look at these protests and treat them in such a different way. I don't think that is acceptable.
They are in no way comparable. Let's take, for example, the scale of violence that we've seen. They are in no way comparable.
BLM in the US took over entire cities.
Oh, we're talking about the UK, though.
No, but it was very evident when Keir Starmer aligned himself with BLM that they'd already caused mass chaos in the United States after the murder of George Floyd.
We're talking...
And in the UK.
We don't have these things going on in the US, so let's stick to the...
Well, he made a political decision, didn't he?
Fine.
To align himself with BLM.
Well, you guys will have a strong opinion to this, and I'm going to carry this conversation on. I'm also going to show you what's occurring in Birmingham tonight. You won't want to miss this. I'll see you guys in 2.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
You'll relate to this one. We've all been there, haven't we? Tensions high in the car as you head off on the latest adventure or holiday during the summer break.
Now, with the average family set to spend about 3.5 hours a week together in the car driving on the roads during the holidays, new research has shown that our relationships could be tested to the limit.
Yes, figures show that 21% are having arguments for simple things like the driver going the wrong way, which we were saying is not actually very simple. That's very serious.
I was going to say that. I'm surprised it's just 21%. Yeah. If I was going the wrong way down the road,
you'd know about
you'd hear from me.
A further 20% squabbling over how their partner drives, yes, and 25% admitting to being more prone to rowing when their kids are misbehaving. It's a lot to deal with, isn't it?
Fair enough.
Well, we're joined now by dating and relationship coach and author Persia Lawson. Good to see you this morning, Persia. What is it about being in a car that just makes things so tense?
Well, I think it's probably quite obvious, isn't it? It's the fact that we are in a confined space, we can't go anywhere, and it can just really create so much tension and stress, especially if you and your other half or a family member, whoever you're in the car with, are going through a little bit of a tricky time. And if it's really hot outside, that doesn't help either. So inevitably, it creates a lot of irritation and bickering, I would say, from my experience.
And what is it about children? If you add children into the mix, it just makes things very, very difficult, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, because there's a lot of, are we there yet?
Yeah.
Kicking the back seat and just squabbles, kicking the siblings. So adding children into the mix is just going to turn the heat up on that tension.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Okoye, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled. Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry till 7. Mike Goodwin and James Schneider remain alongside me. Lorraine says Keir Starmer seems to be lighting the touch paper every time he opens his mouth. Lots of people are really not happy at all with the way he's dealing with it. But Liam says, look, I'll be honest, I can't stand Starmer, but I've got to say, when there's anarchy in the country, you need to rally around the Prime Minister and the government. He says the last thing we need right now is more division. Look, talking about right now, let's have a look what is happening in Birmingham tonight.
Community leaders have been speaking to the police as well because...
Free Palestine! Free Palestine!
But I think, apologies for the language you're hearing, but a sense of the anger I think you can hear there.
Yeah, Katie, I think Becky...
I've got to say, because I feel very sad about this whole thing, because people took to the streets initially with legitimate concerns. So many people would say that their concerns have been ignored for way too long. I think a lot of those concerns are very, very valid. The problem that you've got now is that now this has all been overtaken because like the most horrendous violence that you keep referencing.
What was the one on what were the legitimate concerns that people took to the street on and started the violence on Tuesday in Southport and attacked the mosque? What were the legitimate concerns there?
Well, they would say that they're taking to the... And I'm not a spokesperson for the people that are taking to the streets, but I do know, I listen to people every single day, so I'm listening to what people are saying, that actually what happened in Southport was the light, if you like, that flipped it all off, and people would say that grievances had been caused and festering for a very long time.
Why would a mosque be attacked after a horrific Saturday?
I shall answer that, actually. Many rumours were going around, which I have to be clear turned out to be untrue. But from what I've seen and from what I've heard and from what I've understood by talking to people, there was an arrest made whilst that vigil was happening. Footage of that arrest went absolutely viral on social media. It's been, you might have even seen it yourself. It was spread far and wide, and that was reported.
The BNP.
And that was and that was reported to be a Muslim. So for those people on the ground, they were receiving reports that this is what had happened, that this Muslim had this knife and so on and so forth. It wasn't true. That was not true, and I think everybody needs to understand that was not true.
Of course that wasn't true, but it was not as spontaneous as that. It was not as spontaneous as that. I've spoken to people who were in Southport at the time. There were people coming in from outside Southport, racist, far-right activists from out of town who came in prior to the vigil, and then when there was very little policing, called in for more, and then set rampage and attacked the mosque.
Well,
this was not a spontaneous mistake. It was also egged on by figures in our politics and our media. Often those are the same people spreading these. There are questions to answer about who this person was, etc., which leads to anti-Muslim violence that we saw on our streets. This was not a spontaneous result of misguided policies about multiculturalism or whatever else.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I respect your view. I have a very different view. I think for lots of people who have watched these protests, or even some of the people who have participated in them, I mean, clearly there is a distinction between what happened in Southport and the underlying concerns in the country. For many people, you know, I remember when Keir Starmer, I think yesterday, said, people have a right to feel safe in this country. Everybody agrees with that. But a lot of British people would say, well, we have a right to feel safe in our country too. And if you're not controlling the borders, if you're allowing 130,000 people into the country illegally and we don't know who they are, if you are presiding over demographic changes that we've never had in the history of our country, while also not really integrating people who are coming into the country, if you're letting more criminals onto the streets, releasing them out of prisons, if you're refusing to have a serious, mature, grown-up conversation about issues that have been very evident in these towns for many years, towns like Telford and Rotherham and Rochdale, and you've been called a racist by pointing to the very visible examples of multiculturalism breaking down, and I'm talking about the sexual exploitation of young white girls, then you don't feel safe in this country. And you do feel like there are no-go areas. And I think this incident, yes, of course, there was an element of organisation. And there are far-right activists on the streets causing mayhem. And as I've said repeatedly, if you break the law, you should be arrested, you should be chucked into prison. But let's stop kidding ourselves. This is about the borders. This is about a lack of control. The best thing Keir Starmer and the Labour movement can do right now, if it's serious about governing this country, is regain control of the borders and slow immigration. Those are two things Keir Starmer should be doing right now. If he does that, I suspect these riots and protests will dissipate and Labour could go on to have a successful period in government. But if we're going to sit here pretending that this is actually about the far right rather than this groundswell of opposition on issues where, to be frank, the British people have been lied to and misled, I think this is going to escalate. And that's what I'm worried about. I don't really want this to escalate. And so I think we need to get control of
nobody wants it to escalate. And I do need to reiterate...
Well, I'm not sure that nobody wants it to escalate.
OK, some wrong-uns that are intent on absolute chaos in society because perhaps they will actually stand to benefit for themselves. Yeah, perhaps some of those people want it to escalate. I certainly don't want it to escalate. And as I said repeatedly, previous shows last week, it's never acceptable to attack any place of worship, whether that's a mosque, a synagogue, a church, whatever. Those places, whilst they might not be important, I mean, I'm not overly religious, so, you know, places of worship to me, they're not really that relevant because I'm not religious. But to someone who is religious, those places mean an awful lot to them. They are very, very precious. A mosque, obviously precious to a Muslim in the way that a church would be precious to a Christian and a synagogue to a Jewish person. There's no excuse to damage those places that are so precious to many, just to make that point absolutely clear. Now, one police commissioner, I found this very interesting. She's a lady called Donna Jones. She is the chair of the Association of Police and Crime Commissioner, and she is the Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. She issued a statement on Saturday that was published, and I have to say it was hastily deleted. Among this, she was saying stuff about she'd spoken to people from both sides of the spectrum, and she was saying the only way to stem the tide of violent disorder is to acknowledge what is causing it. She went on to say that the attacks in Southport were a catalyst, but the commonality among the protest groups appeared to be focused on three key areas. One, the decision to protect Britain's sovereignty. Two, the need to uphold British values, and in order to do this, stop illegal immigration. And three, the growth of feeling across the country, which has mirrored to a lesser extent the rebellion to illegal immigration that's played out across France over the last 12 months. That statement was very quickly deleted, and so many people from a variety of levels of seniority in public life have called for her to lose her job.
It's ridiculous. She's gone out and she's talked to people and she's asked them why they're involved in the process. I had the same over the last few days on Twitter and X, Michelle. People kind of shrieking at me for pointing to wider issues because we're incapable of having a serious, mature discussion about these issues. It's very obvious as to why people feel so frustrated and fed up in this country. It's obvious to everybody except the people who presided over those policies, because if we start to acknowledge what has actually brought us here, and there are some policies that I think James and I would agree on. We've had 30 years, I would argue, of a political revolution that has left a lot of people feeling very alienated, very marginalised in British society. It isn't only to do with issues around migration. But if we start to have that debate, Michelle, about how this elite consensus has gone wrong in this country, well, then the elite class is going to feel threatened. So instead, what we're having is a very managed discussion, a tightly controlled discussion about social media, misinformation, disinformation, individual agitators, Tommy Robinsons, etc. What we're not doing is we're not getting into the more important discussion in this country about how we can fix the underlying problems. They don't want to have that conversation because it will undermine their position. I mean, already we're talking about expanding definitions of Islamophobia. We're talking about calling millions of people far right. We're talking about shutting down, alternative viewpoints. It looks to me like an elite class that is actually struggling and has a sense that it's losing control. Free speech should not be the first victim of this scandal. Free speech, free expression needs to be protected and preserved. That's how we'll find our way through this.
Where I agree with Matt is that the establishment, the elite that runs the country and has been destroying the country for, I'd say, longer than 30 years, I'd say more like 45 years, don't want to discuss those issues. And that is why a section of that elite has spent the last 30 years demonising migrants and demonising minorities and demonising Muslims, because it is to distract from the real discussion about the structural issues that Matt mentions, rather than to engage with them, because they would reorder the power we have in society. And where I radically disagree about this statement, I don't think that she should lose her job. I think it's an elected position. She can just be voted out. But the idea that these protests are about the need to uphold British values, I mean, how breaking into a hotel and trying to set it on fire with people inside it has got anything to do with... Hold on,
to be fair to her, she released this before that had happened. So she didn't release this post people setting fire to hotels, people in it, and then said this.
After 5 days of this kind of violence, which was going very much in that direction. A mosque had already been attacked. The incident in Hull had already happened. Many, many bad things had already happened at that point. And to say that this is...
No, the incidents in Hull, which is my hometown...
Oh, that was Saturday.
That all occurred on Saturday. So I just want to be clear about this. She posted this early on Saturday. Lots of the horrendous events that you're describing, that we all agree are horrendous, they happened after that.
So I think it's a very bad statement, but I think that there are elements of it that's correct in the same way I think a lot of what Matt's saying is very wrong, but elements of it are correct. Where she says just arresting people is not enough, you have to deal with underlying issues, that's of course correct. Where Matt says the establishment wants to manage this in a particular way and make it about social media and disinformation, when we talk about that, we might agree on some of those elements. But fundamentally, what we've had for a long time in this country, and it happens in many, many countries, is when the ruling order doesn't work for most people anymore, the people in it, in the ruling order, try to tell people to kick down, don't punch up, don't take away their power. That's what we're seeing today.
Do you agree with that? You will have very strong views on this at home. I'm very aware of that. This whole notion of two-tier policing, do you subscribe to that? Is it a fallacy, or is it something that you feel is very much a real thing in our society? Let's look after the break at the role that things like social media play in all of this. I'll see you in 2.
Hello, good evening. Here's your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. There will be some sunny spells, but also a few showers around tomorrow. Before then, though, we do have a band of rain still making its way across the country. That's because we have a front that's brought some rain to parts of northern UK already, and it's now making its way east-southeastwards across parts of England and Wales, with some heavy bursts in amongst it. Towards the southeast, we're staying drier through this evening and overnight, and here temperatures not dropping a huge amount, so another relatively warm night because of some high humidity. But we do have fresher air coming in behind this front, and so things are going to be turning fresher as we go into tomorrow. First thing tomorrow morning, do watch out for some heavy bursts of rain, particularly across parts of East Midlands into Lincolnshire and also across some central southern parts of England. There may even be some rumbles of thunder around as well. In the Far East, starting bright but rain arriving later, and also plenty of bright fine weather across parts of the southwest, Wales, northern England, Northern Ireland and much of Scotland too, with that front having pushed through already. That being said, there will be a few showers around, particularly towards western parts of Scotland, and as we go through the day tomorrow, we are going to see those showers becoming a bit more widespread, especially across Scotland and Northern Ireland, but even parts of England and Wales could see a few showers at times. The front is going to still be lingering across parts of far eastern England as we go through into tomorrow afternoon, but the rain looks pretty light by the time it reaches here. Still some relatively warm conditions across the Far East, mid-20s here, elsewhere a bit fresher because of that fresher air coming in. On Wednesday we can expect some heavy showery rain across Scotland and then plenty of showers elsewhere and a bit of a cool breezy feel to things as well. And then later on in the week I'm looking at a bit of rain arriving as we go through Thursday, and there could be some more rain pushing through on Friday as well as a series of fronts come in from the Atlantic. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Long delays in South Yorkshire, heading south down the M1 from junction 34 to 33, heading towards Sheffield. A car's broken down in the left lane, not being helped by the roadworks on that stretch, and recovery work is underway. And there are long queues down the M6 through Staffordshire from junction 10A to 10. This is from the M54 towards the Wolverhampton turn-off, of course. An accident involving a car is being recovered, causing queues back to Cannock. Further south on the M6, heading south through Warwickshire from the Cawley services towards Coventry. The lane's been blocked off by an accident. North of Cambridge, the M11 down to a single lane each way, 13 to 14 for ongoing barrier repairs, causing long queues on the approacher and back onto the A14. And the M25 is being held clockwise through Essex just after junction 29 at the A127. A lorry and a car have collided, causing long queues. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Matt Goodwin and James Schneider remain alongside me. I've got to say, many of you, you're pretty much united in condemning the horrendous behaviour. And actually, Paul says the problem here is that this thug element, they're basically playing into the government's hands, because now he says that this will enable Sir Keir Starmer, etc., to basically shut down any conversation on the legitimate grievances that many people have. And yet, unfortunately, that has been a very bad side effect. I said this on my social media on Saturday morning. When you want to take to the streets, it's a free country, but if that's what you choose to do, partaking in the most horrendous acts is not... I mean, I don't even know what goes through people's minds. It is appalling. Two-tier policing. Keir Starmer's come out and spoke very strongly. He said that there is definitely no two-tier policing in society. Do you agree with him?
Yeah, it's interesting, Michelle. What he said is there's no two-tier policing. There is policing without fear or favour, exactly as it should be. So that is a non-issue. The question I would ask Keir Starmer were he here tonight is, well, what do you think is going through people's minds when, for example, they see police officers taking the knee to show solidarity with Black Lives Matter, when they see police officers joining... You might remember that Muslim show trial where a young lad with autism had scuffed a Quran.
I'll never forget it.
And there was a sort of show trial that was put on with the local community, and police officers were sitting on the stage participating in it.
School teacher in Batley, hiding.
There are lots of people who would ask why the police have been so heavy-handed with some of the protests over the last 72 hours, but were seemingly not heavy-handed when it came to protests that included celebrating the murder and rape of Jews. And I think there are lots of people who see a hypocrisy running through the institutions. And this is where I'm frustrated with the Labour government's response, because I'm worried this is going to get worse before it gets better. What Keir Starmer needs to do, and Yvette Cooper, is come out and instead of saying this is all about the far right and it's nothing to do with anybody else and we're going to provide all of this support for mosques and we're not going to talk about anybody else, they should come out and say this is about the condemning violence across the board. This is about supporting all communities, irrespective of race, religion and political views. This is about ensuring that the police remain a politically independent, neutral institution, and this is about ensuring that the institutions of this country are not politicised.
Indeed.
That's what I would be advising Keir Starmer to do, because if he doesn't, this notion of two-tier Keir is going to become embedded, and it is going to become embedded in the national conversation.
Jim?
The reason why mosques are having additional security is because mosques are under attack. Catholic churches, for example, aren't having extra security because Catholic churches aren't under attack. If they were, then they should, of course, have it. There should be no attacks on any places of worship. Now, I just find this discussion so completely through the looking glass.
Why?
So let's take the Met. We've had many discussions here sitting in these chairs, or these are newer, fancier chairs, but they're their predecessors, about failures in the Met, on racism in the police force. We've also had Greater Manchester having to suspend a number of police officers last week over issues of racism. And the things that we're hearing about the two-tier that I hear from Matt Goodwin and from Nigel Farage and from Tommy Robinson are based on things which are objectively not true. Like Suella Braverman saying that Islamists are in control of our city, or that there have been Islamist hate marches throughout our city, or that peace marches are hate marches.
So officers didn't take the knee. That was I imagine that one.
No,
officers didn't turn up at the Muslim show trial where the boy was held up.
Well, I don't know anything about the Muslim
but so you can't sit there and say that I'm lying, because those things happen.
No, I didn't say you're lying. I didn't say that you're lying.
Said the things I said alongside Nigel Farage
and Tommy
were untrue. Well, they weren't true.
Well,
this actually happened. And the point, James, is people see that, and that's why it's fueling a notion of two-tier policing.
Yeah, but the thing is, if people who have places in the media where they can say them loudly, say that there is a two-tier system based on there not being a two-tier system, then people will think that there is one. And the actual reality is that that policing has racism going the other way. If there is a two-tier, you're far more likely to be stopped and searched. If you're black, you're more likely to die in custody, and so on and so forth.
Well, let's carry this conversation on. Very different opinions here. What's yours at home? I'll see you in 2.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Did you ever flirt with the idea of going to America?
Yeah, I've twice happened to me. Once I was offered in Canada the job of a weatherman.
Oh.
Yeah, I was offered that. And I just sort of thought of it, what is the point where your mother, your father would never see you on TV? What's the point of doing it if nobody knows you on it, you know? So I thought...
Big money, though, even for a weatherman.
I did, yeah, it was more than a weather job, but I said no, basically. And then I went and I did this quiz show for Fox TV.
Oh.
Yeah, they said, we want the Irish guy that does the lottery. I think they meant Dermot O'Leary or something. They ended up, they got me, and I couldn't believe it. And I went over to do a daytime version of this. And then 3 days into it, they changed everything, and they said, this is so good, we're putting this out in the evening. And I remember phoning my wife and saying, we're going to have to move out to California.
Oh, wow.
They really want me here, and I'm going down. You know that street with all the palm trees and whatever? That's the way I was going to work, in this limo and whatever. And I had a bungalow there and a golf cart. It was absolutely incredible. Anyway, I'll cut this very long story short. So I'm working really, really bad. A lot of very ignorant people, it has to be said. And really have one regret in my life, that I didn't punch a guy when I was out there. I really would have, if I had my life to live again, I would have really satisfiedly been sacked for punching this git. But basically, anyway, they put the show out. One episode of the show went out, and it came fourth in its rating. So it was behind Lost, it was behind The Biggest Loser, there was something else there.
Fair enough.
Fair enough, and it came fourth, and that was it. It disappeared. 36 shows or so disappeared. Disappeared, never to be shown again.
GB News, the People's Channel. Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi Hi there, Michelle Dewberry, Matt Goodwin. I've just called you Matt Goodwin.
I'm a regular.
Matt Goodwood, I know. What's going on?
Goodwood. What an awful name that would be.
And James Schneider alongside me till 7 o'clock. Maureen and Ron, you don't mess around. You've come up with a solution to this. You said this is simple, Michelle. We bring back the water cannon, we put dye in the water, and people therefore will think twice before they go out and behave badly on the streets, because the dye will take days to come off and we will all know who the wrong uns and the criminals are. There you go. If Sir Keir's listening, you need to hire Maureen and Ron. They know what they're doing. Look, what we just talking about there, this whole two-tier policing. Yeah. Many people are getting in touch just to echo your sentiments at home. You're saying, Michelle, you're talking about two-tier policing. People are giving me examples of the different policing approach for Hare Hills. Many people are asking why haven't the people involved in that Manchester airport attack, where we've seen footage of those police being battered, why haven't those guys, why hasn't that case progressed in terms of charges and so on and so forth? So lots of you feeling very strongly about that two-tier policing.
Well, I'll tell you something else that's pretty obvious, what I'd call two-tier media. Now, I suspect you might not be allowed to say this, but I'll say it, which is that for many months we've had people criticising this television channel, and over the weekend I've noticed...
You can say that.
I've noticed people online over the weekend saying, you know, they think GB News has somehow contributed to this or should be shut down and whatever. I then turn on my television this morning. You know, one of the big complaints of GB News for some people is you get a Conservative sometimes interviewing another Conservative, which does tend to happen in all matters of life. And then I turn on the TV this morning and I see Labour MP Yvette Cooper being interviewed by former Labour MP Ed Balls on a mainstream television channel, and they're married, discussing the riots. I mean, you know, that's two-tier media. That is ridiculous. That should not be happening. So, you know, can we just get real? I think people can see the imbalance. They can see the hypocrisy. They're not stupid. They're not being misinformed. They just want the institutions to be, you know, fair, balanced, and give voice to all different perspectives in society.
James?
Which is not what our media does, and increasingly isn't what our social media does. The reasons why people own media is to shape how society thinks. And today, the reason why people own social media platforms is to more effectively shape the way that society thinks. Now, of course, the media, including GB News, are part of what has created this violence.
Oh, come on.
Oh, come off it. What are you talking about?
I would argue GB News has minimised the tension in this country.
Alongside...
Well, what are you talking about?
Alongside...
I just said don't talk nonsense. What are you talking about then? Expand.
So I think that the demonisation of migrants, the playing into performative cruelty against them, has conformative.
Give me examples. What's performative cruelty?
So the counter to this, though, is...
Well, I wanted to explain what it's talking about. What are you talking about?
The way in which stories are presented, the way in which migrants are dehumanised on GB News and in other media outlets contributes to this, as does the things that politicians say, as does Suella Braverman, who, what she has said, and many other politicians. This is something that's gone back many, many years. You've had politicians previously, in the previous era, they chased the tabloids who would push hateful narratives about minorities, about migrants, about Muslims, and now it is adapted. Now let's look. If we look at social media, what has happened? And I'm not in favour of
I just want to respond to what you're saying about GB News, by the way, because I would categorically deny that we do the things that you're accusing us of. I think that we address issues that matter to people that traditionally many media outlets have just turned a blind eye to because they don't want the controversy or the backlash that comes from other perspectives within the media. If you dare to cover some of those stories, like your grooming gangs and your things like that, I find it really interesting that so many people are, you know, keen to point the finger at social media or media or whatever. Nobody ever really looks at why might people not want an asylum hotel at the end of their road. Why? People hear stories about 70-year-old men just innocently, you know, walking their dogs, getting hacked to death, while someone that's come in from a foreign country screams, "This is for Gaza." Do people not actually think that those kind of things might be driving some of the sentiments that people actually have? I find it fascinating that the blame always just gets pointed everywhere else, because people don't really want to be really honest about some of the things that are actually going on in our society. But look, you've got 20... If you can summarise what you want in 10 seconds, go.
People dislike GB News because it gives voice to people they don't like. That's the problem. The biggest feedback I always get after coming on this show is thank you for representing the voice of people who feel they're shut out of the media debate.
Well, look, there you go. All views welcome on GB News, and you will always hear things you agree with and things you disagree with. Long may it continue, but for now, that's all from us. Thank you for your company. I'll see you tomorrow night.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, here's your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. As we go through the rest of today and into the weekend, there will be some fine sunny weather around, but it's going to turn fresher, and there will be some wet weather arriving because of a frontal system that's already starting to push its way in across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland and has brought some heavy bursts of rain here. It's going to continue to push its way southeastwards as we go through this evening and overnight. So the rain does break up, but it will push into parts of England and Wales overnight, clinging on to some clear skies across the far southeast and clear skies following across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. And as a result, with some fresher air here, temperatures could drop quite low single figures perhaps in rural spots. Elsewhere, a bit of a milder night because of the cloud and the rain that's pushing its way in. There could be some heavy bursts in the rain as we go through tomorrow morning across parts of central southern England and Wales and towards the southeast, so just watch out for that. Otherwise, it's quite a cloudy story across many parts of England and Wales, but a brighter, sunnier start to the day across northern western parts, particularly across Scotland and Northern Ireland. That being said, there will be a few showers around for western parts of Scotland, and some of these could be a little bit on the heavy side. As we go through the day itself then, more cloud and more outbreaks of rain across southeastern England, and there could be some pulses of heavy rain affecting some southern counties at times too, but generally all of that wet weather should clear away towards the east. More showers to come across Scotland and Northern Ireland. In between though, a lot of bright and fine weather. That being said, temperatures not as high as they have been recently, still getting into the mid-20s for some of us, mid to high teens further north. More showers to come as we go through the end of the day tomorrow across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some clearer weather towards the south, and so it could be a bit of a chilly, fresh night for some of us as we go into Sunday morning. And then Sunday does bring some wet weather arriving from the northwest, and that's going to gradually push its way southeastwards next week. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, my name is Johnny Ratner. Problems along the M6 in two places.